I have seen the torch of freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dreams some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all.
So a deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in this wonderful land of ours. I'm Dr. George Simon, welcoming you to another edition of Character Matters. This is the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that we face and that affects so many aspects of our lives, from our individual relationships to our family relations, to our community relations, our politics, our business affairs, our international affairs. Every aspect of our lives is affected by the character issue. So I've spent a lifetime, professional lifetime, writing and speaking about the issue and dealing with it in my professional practice, and sharing those insights with you on this program and on my blog at manipulative-people.com or drgeorgesimon.com. Either URL will take you to the same place. And if you want to join the conversation tonight, please do so. I'll welcome your call at 501-258-8326. That's 501-258-8326. I'll be happy to take your call. Well, it's been another eventful week, and now it looks like we're dealing with a government shutdown. You know, there are many different ways to look at that issue. You know, there are many who say that when the so-called non-essential, non-security related aspects of government shut down, you learn very quickly just how unessential, in a real sense, so many of the activities are. And some say that only points to the incredible waste that there is in government. But the other side of that is just the political maneuvering, the manipulation that goes on here, as both sides battle one another. You know, there is so much fighting built into our system, not just in our system of government, but into our economic system, just the way we operate culturally. We are not a cooperative society by any stretch. We are a competitive society. And there are pluses and minuses to that. With healthy, free competition, There's always the possibility for excellence. You'll always find those individuals who have the resources, the talents, the abilities, the training, the expertise to really excel. So that's one of the benefits. That's one of the great benefits of a competitive system. But one of the drawbacks is that a lot of folks get left behind. Those that don't have the same opportunity, the same talent, the same abilities in one way or another, who are disadvantaged in some way, get left out. And the other thing is that, there's a balance that needs to be struck between the rugged individualism that helped basically pioneers tame the frontier, and the community we need to prosper as a whole, the sense of community that we need to prosper as a whole. And unfortunately, I think we've lost that. I think we've lost a healthy sense of community. And this past Friday, on my blog at manipulative-people.com, drgeorgesimon.com, I posted an article on narcissism, a popular topic these days. And one of the points that I made, the main point of the article actually, is that in some systems, some cultural systems, narcissism works. In other words, it pays. It pays off big time. So it's not only enabled, as some folks like to say, but it's even rewarded, promoted. And so we can't really be surprised. We can't really be surprised when self-centered, egomaniacal folks increasingly enter our midst. We can't really be surprised. Our culture has taken some turns, and by its very nature these days, it seems to foster a good deal of narcissism. Just look at how some things are glorified in the media and in the entertainment industry. Some behaviors that would have been thought unspeakable not too long ago are not only tolerated, it's not only a matter of tolerance or permissiveness, but these behaviors that used to outrage us are actually glorified in some way, many times. And this sends a message. This sends a clear message. Our children are watching, whether we like it or not. They don't just pay attention to what you say. As a matter of fact, you pay much less attention to what you say, much more attention to what you do, and much more attention to what they see other people do. So, narcissism is not an abnormality these days. And I make the point at all my workshops, and I made it on the post this past Friday, that things used to be considered an aberration or a disorder, if you will. Certain behavioral patterns, certain styles of relating used to be considered by professionals to be a disturbance or a disorder when, one, the style of relating or the behavior pattern deviated significantly from the norm, or two, it caused the person an incredible amount of pain and distress, or caused distress to others significantly, and especially that it impaired the person's ability to function. in a wide variety of spheres. Well, we see examples of narcissism in the extreme textbook cases of extraordinary egocentricity, grandiosity. We see this big time these days, and it's hard to make the case that, number one, that it's that deviant from our typical cultural standards. It's hard to make the case that it's that deviant. It seems to take more and more and more egregious examples of narcissism to outrage us. And not only that, it works. It's functional. It doesn't cause the person severe impairments in a lot of life spheres. Now, where it is a problem, where narcissism is always a problem, where excessive self-focus, when inflated self-esteem, and all the other things that go along with narcissism, when they are a problem, is within the context of a healthy, intimate relationship. You can't have a healthy relationship with an egomaniac. Just that simple. There are people who will simply use and abuse you. Use and abuse you. And, by the way, without compunction. Why without compunction? Well, because they don't have the conscience necessary to give them pause. It's just that simple. So they will just simply use and abuse you. Now, I mentioned in the article on Friday, you can still find it, manipulative-people.com or drgeorgesimon.com. That's drgeorgesimon.com. Or in any of my books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, the textbook, the handbook for all of you, professionals and lay people alike, the manual for understanding all of the various disturbed characters out there, and also what to look for in the way of getting help when you are desperate for it. And then my book, The Judas Syndrome, written in a vein that the Christian faith community can understand and appreciate, perhaps. And then my book with Dr. Kathy Armistead, How Did We End Up Here?, which is the guide for relationship partners, the guide for surviving and thriving in this character disordered world of ours, how to navigate through it, how to understand when somebody is or is not sincerely likely to make some positive changes, and whether or not you can trust again, and what you need to do to move on with your life. All of those tips are in How Did We End Up Here? But back to what I was saying. We have created a culture, unfortunately. We have allowed this culture to evolve in which we reinforce very heavily narcissism in all of its manifestations. And it's functional. Narcissism is functional. People with inflated self-esteem, with an extraordinary confidence, who think so much of themselves and who think about themselves and what they're going to get out of life, they tend to prosper. Where things become a problem is within the context of a healthy, intimate relationship, because these are the kinds of people, as I point out in my book, who will use and abuse you and do so without compunction. They lack sufficient conscience, and they lack sufficient empathy to do otherwise. And that's a problem. So the very nature of the problem has had to be redefined in our character-impaired age. And as anybody who has dealt with a narcissist in a relationship, you know that on the front end of the relationship, at the very beginning, when that person is looking at you with those eyes of desire, and when they display all that confidence and that self-assuredness, as anybody who's been in a relationship with someone like this before, that can look pretty attractive on the front end, and that's what I was writing about this past Friday. That can look very attractive on the front end. But it always becomes an intimacy disaster, and it always results in heartbreak. I know there are those of you who have been through that experience, so maybe you have some wisdom to share, or maybe you just have a question you want to ask. And if you want to join the conversation or you have a question you want to ask, feel free to do so. It's 501-258-8326. That's 501-258-8326, and I'll be happy to take your call. Well, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that the program would be taking a new direction, and I fulfilled that pledge a bit last week when I was talking about some things that I don't usually talk about in such frank terms, because I don't want the program to become a strictly political discussion. You know, here's how ruggedly independent I am. I see valid issues, valid concerns, valid human concerns on both sides of the political spectrum. I see it. The bridge that we need to build is enormous because we have become so polarized in our political stances and so divided. And that's primarily because neither side wants to respect the legitimate concerns of the other. Why? Well, fear. We had an interesting experience this past week. I was on retreat part of the weekend, and one of the things that came out of that was a really deep realization of what it really takes to break down some of the barriers, the artificial barriers that we construct between us. And here's the fundamental truth of that. And anybody that's been through a relationship disaster and has been torn and broken and then healed may have learned some of this the hard way. And that is, we lose our need for defenses and for barriers and boundaries. We lose the need for that when it's safe to be without them. This may sound a little weird as an example, but I read an article about a camp, not just for nudists, but for naturalists of all type. Some people who like to be au naturel, but some people who are just but broader than that are all these folks who just um, want to enjoy life in the natural state and want to enjoy all of what nature has to offer. And in this camp, there are no locks on the doors. No one has concern for their belongings. It just seems that these like-minded folks who just want to be free to express and to receive have such trust of one another that basically the place is wide open, which is just in congruence with the theme. Well, there's a message there. As weird as an example as that is, there's still a message there. And that is, when we feel safe, when everything's taken care of, and we don't have to worry about one another, then the boundaries naturally come down. The barriers naturally come down. We don't worry about walls. We worry only when we fear we're being taken advantage of, mistreated, abused in some way. So, if we're going to break down the barriers, we can't do that first. What we have to do is we have to make it safe for them to come down. Once it's safe for them to come down, they come down of their own accord. I think of the Berlin Wall and when it came tumbling down. And how when both sides were actually ready, there was not much of a protest at all. We didn't have to rail like Ronald Reagan did at Premier Gorbachev, as he so famously uttered in that one speech, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." You don't have to rail about these things. Once it becomes okay, once there's enough level of trust built between both sides, in any contest, in any endeavor, in any realm of human life, the walls naturally come down. Now, we unfortunately just happen to be the only species on the planet that preys on itself. We have members, we're at the top of the food chain. So we're competing primarily with ourselves for survival of the fittest, as it were. And it takes a whole different outlook to transcend that. It's the outlook that all the great spiritual masters tried to give us. Tried to get us to see that bigger picture, that we're all in this together, that we're part of something, that we will all do our time and play our roles, whatever they might be, and then we're dust again. But in our awareness of that bigger picture, if what we strive for is to find the best fit for ourselves within that bigger picture, if that's what we make our endeavor, it's not just what can I get out of this experience before I die? How much can I enjoy? when we have in mind something more than ourselves, all of life changes for us. Our outlook changes. Reality even changes for us. The world becomes a different place. It's pretty amazing, really. But you have to have that experience to know what I'm talking about. At any rate, if you want to join the conversation tonight, the number to call is 501-258-8326. That's 501-258-8326. We're talking tonight about narcissism and its functionality in our crazy mixed up culture. But if you have something else that you want to talk about, that's just fine. If you have a question you want to ask, that's just fine. If you have a situation you want to share that you think our listeners would appreciate hearing about, that's just fine too. Give us a call at 501-258-8326. That's 501-258-8326. Well, it's been a busy week for some on Capitol Hill as they scurried around and tried to find some solutions to the budget mess so that they could avoid a shutdown. One wonders just how seriously folks were really trying to make a deal, because both sides, each side is using the threat of the shutdown, which is now a reality, as a chip, a bargaining chip, as a bit of leverage to get something that they want. Playing hardball, so to speak. And this is how we do business. This is exactly how we do business. It's built into the very fabric of our society. We fight like crazy. This was one of the realizations that I had very, very early on in my professional work. I remember coming to this realization as I was the training that I received in psychology was very eclectic. And the traditional psychology paradigms were all rooted in this notion. They were all based on the premise, basically, that we build these unconscious defenses against fears, both real and imagined, and this is really the reason for our psychological problems, that we try to manage our anxieties, basically, as best as we can, but poorly so. And it's all about how we try to manage our unconscious fears and conflicts that gives rise to our psychological problems. And of course, therefore, the fix to that is, according to the way the model works, help people to realize the kind of internal unconscious fears and conflicts that they've been dealing with, and have repressed for so long that they've lost conscious contact with those fears and emotional conflicts. And once they see it and then work through those issues, they'll be better. Well, I found that to be true in about 10% of the cases that I was dealing with. But about 90% of the time, that whole way of looking at things just didn't seem to matter all that much. And what really just hit me like a ton of bricks one day was the realization of just how much of life is not running in fear, and not building defenses, but rather fighting for the things we want. Not running at all, but fighting. Money, power, security, to thrive, to prosper, to get ahead, to succeed. We did an incredible amount of fighting, I realized. Much more fighting than running, and yet all of our traditional psychologies were rooted or were overly focused on, I should say, not only the running people do, but the manner in which they run. Whereas most of life is about how we fight, not about how we run. And that turned on the light bulb, so to speak. And then that training that I had in the other paradigms, in the many other paradigms, the non-traditional paradigms, that focused more on how we learn and how we think and what we have to do to change the way we think and to change the way we approach things and to change the way we deal with things. And especially, most especially, to change the ways we fight. Once I took a really good look at that, once I started considering that, everything changed for me as a professional, as a therapist, and that's when I started writing. My first book, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, was about how people fight surreptitiously, how they fight in underhanded, deceptive manners, how they try to get the better of you while trying to look good at the same time. It was an eye-opener for me just to examine that through case study after case study. And it was an eye-opener for a lot of other folks who attended my workshops to realize how they were being taken advantage of by these covert aggressors that became the subject of my first book, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People. And clearly I was on to something, because 18 foreign languages later, soon to be 19, with the Chinese edition coming out in just a month or so, and many hundreds of thousands of books sold independently before going to a larger press. Clearly, I was onto something, because so many folks have found in that little handbook the secret to understanding and dealing with the most manipulative personality types. And then my book, Character Disturbance, which took a look at all of the various disturbed characters among us and how they operate and how they wreak havoc in relationships, and what to do about them, how to really understand them, how to understand their modus operandi, and especially how to empower yourself, and most especially what to look for in the way of the only kind of help that will actually help when you go looking for help. So many people who are in relationships with character disordered folks have sought help only to experience what we call therapy-induced trauma, which means that they went for help, and not only didn't they get it, and not only didn't their relationship partner but somehow they ended up feeling worse for the experience. Maybe, I'm just giving that this sometimes happens. Maybe their manipulative partner was such a gosh, I can't even speak tonight. Schmoozer was so able to charm the socks off of the therapist, had a way with words, was so calm, cool, and collected, and so charming, and so savvy with regard to technique, that they were able to completely impression manage. That's what we call it, impression management. Cast a favorable impression on the therapist, and then the victim in the covertly abusive relationship felt like chopped liver. They felt awful. They felt somehow like they were the bad guy, and that the therapist just didn't get it. So they went for help, but they ended up feeling worse for the endeavor. So that's one of the reasons for my book, Character Disturbance, and a big reason at that. And then my book, Judas Syndrome, I got serious about this whole issue of faith and what it can really do and what it's really all about. You know, we are complex creatures. If we're honest with ourselves, there's an awful lot going on in there. Not one of us doesn't have a whole heck of a lot going on inside. It's just a matter of how awake and aware we are to it all. There's a lot in there. We're capable of just about anything. But what can elevate us? What can transform us? What can save us from our baser selves is faith. Faith in something bigger. Faith in something higher. Something bigger. Something that transcends us. And so I wrote about that in the Judas Syndrome, giving many case examples. And then lastly, my book, How Did We End Up Here, with Dr. Kathy Armistead. And I'm going to be talking over the next few programs about the progress being made on my fifth and probably last book, which will be coming out. I know I've been promising this for a long time, and I know that I've confessed how difficult it's been with me to stop refining the product, basically. But I am committed to making this last work of mine the kind of work that I can live with. And the reason it's taken me this long to get the final product out is that I wanted to have a certain, not religious, but a certain spiritual groundedness that will resonate with everyone regardless of their spiritual inclinations, even if they are atheists. It should resonate. So that's why I have spent so much time with the book. Because it's about, of course, as I've mentioned before, the 10 Commandments, what I call the 10 essential axioms, the life lessons that must not only be learned, but embraced and lived out for a person to be of sound character. And so this book is really important to me because it's not just for our younger folks who are trying to learn those most essential life lessons that will make them, that will help them become healthy, responsible adults. But it's also a guidebook for those folks who have reached that point in their life where they realize that their egocentric, grandiose, inflated, self-serving, exploitative, abusive ways just aren't working anymore. And they're beginning to see the bigger picture. And they've started to grow a little bit of a conscience. And they've come to a better degree of awareness, not only about themselves, but about how they have been dealing with the rest of the world. And maybe they're not as happy with themselves and their way of doing things as they used to be. And they're wondering, so now what do I do? What do I need to do to cultivate relationships that fulfill? What do I need to do to find fulfillment in my life's work? What do I need to do to really thrive and prosper in a way that I can be happy with myself? You know, I've conquered this and I've conquered that and I've gained this and I've gained that and I'm still miserable. Why is that? They're asking those questions. And so this is a guidebook, so to speak, that I'm working on. A guidebook that will help both young people who are trying to learn how to be responsible and those individuals who have come to that point in their life where they've realized that some things have to change. And that there are certain things that they simply did not learn well enough. And even if they were exposed to the teaching, they didn't want to embrace the learning. And they didn't want to take in the lessons and subordinate themselves to the lessons that would have guided them to a more purposeful, more significant life. So I admit to being my own worst enemy, editing ad nauseum and rewriting this book, but it will be as it needs to be when it finally hits press. And I pray that it will be not just my most popular work, because I'd certainly like it to reach as many hearts as possible, but I pray that it will truly be my best. I pray that it will be an instrument of helping to inaugurate what I envision as a new age that we are on the precipice of. I think we're finally coming to our senses about a lot of things. I think the age of rampant character disturbance has to come to an end. It has to. If we're going to make it, it has to. We have to have relationships that work, that unite instead of divide. We have to have families that endure, that stay together, that nurture growth, that help instill essential values, and communities that mutually support, that have a positive identity, that serve common needs. This has to happen. If we're going to make it, this has to happen. And this is the weekend this is the weekend when, in commemoration of the decision by the Supreme Court that legalized abortion, Roe v. Wade, still tremendous division about this. You know, interestingly, when the decision was handed down and there were some protests, the dominant thinking at the time was there'll be some hotheads who disapprove of this, and there'll be some dissent, but in the end, that will all die down in just a few years, and people will realize that this right of a woman to determine what happens to her body is a right that's inseverable, and so therefore things will calm down. And you know, this divide, unfortunately, has not mended. And the reason it has, in my opinion, is because neither side wants to recognize the legitimate issue on either side. Those folks who are pro-choice have a very legitimate, in my opinion, very legitimate. I don't know how you can argue this. They have a very legitimate argument about whether or not you should be able to force a woman who has any kind of doubt whatsoever, for whatever reason, about whether she wants to birth and nurture a child, to force that woman to carry a child? It just seems an invasion. That's a very legitimate issue. However, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind, none whatsoever, that respect for the preciousness of life is at an all-time disastrous low. No question about that. And it is at the root of so many of our problems that we have lost our reverence for this miracle that is creation. It's at the root of our pillaging and plundering and raping of the earth, as well as at the root of our insensitivity and inhumanity to one another. Life has to mean something. It's a miracle in the first place. As far as we know, whether or not there are hundreds or maybe thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of places in the universe capable of sustaining it, as far as we know, in this entire vast universe, this is the only place where this kind of life exists. And to sustain it, we have to first revere it. We have to care about it. We have to want to sustain it. We place so many other things. We value so many other things more than life itself. It's not funny. Especially we value our comfort. we think about our comforts. We take our existence for granted. We take this life for granted. And so we care about our comforts. We put that first. We're not willing to bear very much to help ensure the life and the rest of creation that sustains life. It's a sad, sad commentary on an age that's been with us now for some time. I think it was rooted in the post-war prosperity that we experienced. We're one of the few places, we're the only place on the planet that after the last World War came out with a profit. We had just been through the Great Depression. Things were still not really turning around. But then we unleashed our manufacturing power in the production of arms. And in our conquests, we were able to exploit many opportunities. And we ended up, for the first time in our history, for the very first time in our history, with a thriving middle class and upper middle class so large that we became the economic giant that we did become. You only have to look at history to know that it's not always been that way for us. And in that great boom, we got fat, lazy, sassy, pampered, indulged, far too comfortable. And we started to value our comfort over everything else. Over everything else. And we forgot the terrible price paid to purchase it. We forgot just about everything that really counted. We started to take it all for granted. And then we developed this attitude, this tremendous attitude of entitlement. That we were entitled to be happy, fat, sassy, and indulged. And anything that displeased us, inconvenienced us, bothered us in any way could just simply be discarded because why should we have to endure? Why should we have to suffer? Well, just ask anyone who'd been through the Great Depression or been through war or strife. You see, how we deal with our suffering is what defines our character. I'll repeat that. How we deal with our suffering is what defines our character. That's what it is. We've lost our way on that, but we're getting it back. We're getting it back. I think, hopefully, I pray, I hope, it's my sincerest wish that this book that I'm in the process of writing will do some small part of helping usher in the age that I believe is at our doorstep. I believe we're on the cusp of a revolution in thought, in purpose, in sentiment, a real change of heart and mind about what really matters. Character matters. It's going to be our salvation. It's going to be our salvation. And I'm going to do all that I can to promote it. And we're going to be talking more about it on this program because that's what its title is. And as we close the program in a little bit, you're going to hear play the song that my wife and I wrote several years ago now, 19 years ago, almost 20 years ago. It's hard to imagine that it's been that long. Hard to imagine. We wrote it actually as a song for the turn of the millennium. The formal title of America, My Home, as it's popularly known, is Anthem for the Millennium. So it was written as a tune to help inaugurate the new millennium and celebrate the best of American ideals. And the message in the song is very simple, and it's personal. Our greatness as a country has never been in our economic power, which is substantial, or our military might, which is unmatched. But that's not where our greatness has ever lied. It's always been in the character of our people, who understand and who cherish and embrace and live out our very best ideals. It's in those folks who take their responsibilities seriously, invest in their families, work hard at their endeavors, help each other, build community, take care of the less fortunate. That's what makes America great. That's what's always made us great. So the secret always lies in character. That's why it matters so much. It's why I do this. It's why we have this program. Whether we like it or not, whether we admit it or not, character matters now more than any time before. And what will it take to help foster it again? It will take a new paradigm, a brand new way of seeing things, a brand new way of living, rooted in time-tested, time-honored principles. There's nothing new under the sun, in a way. But we have to have a new way to frame it. And we will. And so I'll continue to write about it and talk about it and do my part to help foster it. And I'll see you again next week on another edition of Character Matters. I'm Dr. George Simon. Thanks for tuning in.
From the shorelines to the prairies, to the city.